Okay, I want you to imagine something for a second. Picture this. You're in a northern forest. It's getting dark.
Right.
And there's this fog rolling in from the Baltic Sea. It's clinging to all the trees. And you just know, deep down, that there are trolls in those woods.
And we're not talking about the cute ones from the movies.
No, definitely not. Not the ones with the crazy hair from the 90s. I mean, the nasty, chaos-loving kind.
The kind that lives under a bridge and causes problems.
Exactly. Now, in a fantasy story, this is where you call in a wizard, right? Or maybe some knights. But in the story we're unpacking today, the defense against these trolls, it's an army of elves.
And I think we should probably clarify right away that we haven't suddenly become a fantasy review show.
Not at all.
We are very much grounded in the real world. Specifically, we're looking at the front line of modern hybrid warfare in, well, Lithuania, for this example, but also the entire Nordic-Baltic region.
Precisely. We are talking about the elves. And they aren't mythical creatures with pointy ears. They are a network. A network of up to, 5,000 volunteers?
That's the number, yes, 5,000.
Real people. I mean, you're talking about teachers, IT professionals, students, even grandmothers. And their whole mission is to fight these trolls.
Yes, hostile actors, yeah. Often state-sponsored.
Right, who are just systematically spreading disinformation online.
Yeah.
It is basically a crowdsourced war for the truth.
It's an absolutely fascinating phenomenon. And honestly, the elves are just the tip of the iceberg. What we're really diving into today is this massive, incredibly sophisticated defense system.
A system built by the Nordic-Baltic region, which I've seen it referred to as the NB8.
The NB8, that's right. It's a geopolitical term for the group.
So who exactly is in this NB8 group? It sounds like a band.
It kind of is in a geopolitical sense. You've got the 5 Nordic countries, so that's Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden.
Okay.
And then you have the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania.
So 8 countries in total.
Exactly. And they share a lot, a history of trade, democratic values. But, and this is really the core of our discussion today, they share a very specific and very intense threat. They are right on the front lines of this new kind of information warfare.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then, to really unpack how these, let's be honest, relatively small nations are using what the sources call a whole-of-society approach to survive.
And it really is whole of society. The old model of defense, spies and soldiers, it's just not enough anymore.
Not for this kind of threat. Now your national defense involves, apparently, tech companies, teachers, and how you read the news in the morning.
That's it, exactly. And this brings us to the central tension we're going to keep coming back to. How do you fight propaganda? How do you fight lies and foreign manipulation without becoming a censorship state yourself?
That is the tightrope, isn't it? How do you protect the truth without having the government just dictate what is and isn't true?
It's an enormous challenge.
It really is. It touches on free speech, on privacy, on national security all at once. And, before we really get into the nuts and bolts of it, I just want to acknowledge that fighting an information war puts your personal data at risk.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to be talking a lot about digital resilience today, and that really starts with your own personal privacy. And that's why we're so glad to have www.myprivacy.blog and pi.compliancehub.wiki supporting us on this.
It's a very fitting partnership, actually, because data privacy is a huge piece of this resilience puzzle. If an adversary can easily harvest your population's data, they can weaponize it against you.
100%. So whether you're just an individual trying to lock down your digital life, and you should definitely check out www.myprivacy.blog for that, or maybe you're a business trying to navigate the, frankly, nightmarish world of data compliance regulations, pii.compliancehub.wiki is an incredible resource.
For sure. Okay, so let's set the scene. Why this reacher? Why the NB8? On the surface, they seem so peaceful.
Right. High standard of living, beautiful design, lots of coffee. They're always topping the happiness indexes.
They are peaceful societies, but they are also in a geostrategically critical position. And to really get the urgency they feel, you have to go back to 2007. To the bronze soldier crisis in Estonia.
The bronze soldier. I remember hearing about this.
A lot of people see it as sort of patient zero for modern hybrid warfare.
Okay, so this was a Soviet-era statue in the capital, Tallinn, right?
Correct. A memorial to the Soviet soldiers who liberated Estonia in World War II. But for most Estonians, it was a very painful symbol of 50 years of Soviet occupation.
A symbol of an occupier, not a liberator.
Exactly. So the Estonian government decided to move it, to relocate it from the city center to a military cemetery. And this decision just It lit a match.
There were riots.
Massive riots in the streets, mostly from the local Russian-speaking population who felt their heritage was being attacked. But at the exact same time, and this is the crucial part, Estonia was hit by a huge, coordinated wave of cyber attacks.
And when you say cyber attacks, we're not just talking about someone defacing a website. This was serious.
This was a digital siege. We're talking about banks, government ministries, newspapers, even emergency services. They all went dark.
Wow.
It was like someone just unplugged the entire country. You couldn't use an ATM. You couldn't get news. The government itself couldn't communicate.
That is absolutely terrifying. It's like a medieval siege, but it's invisible.
That's a perfect way to put it. And it was the first time a country had been hit by a coordinated hybrid attack like that. You had the kinetic riots on the street, fueled by information operations, combined with a crippling cyber war.
A total wake-up call.
For the entire region, they realized the battlefield wasn't just about tanks crossing a border anymore. It was about servers and narratives and social cohesion.
And looking at the source material for today, it seems the primary actor behind these sorts of operations. Well, that hasn't changed much since 2007.
No, the sources are all very explicit about this. While there are other actors to consider, the primary state-level threat identified by all these nations is Russia.
And the tactics have evolved, I imagine?
Oh, absolutely. It's much more sophisticated now. Disinformation campaigns, forged letters that look like they're from government officials, hack and leak operations.
And pushing these specific narratives, right? Like I saw in the reports, things like NATO is occupying the Baltics, or that the West is decadent or fascist.
Yes, or that these small, successful democracies are somehow failed states. It's all about undermining them.
I did notice China is starting to appear more in these intelligence reports, too.
It is, but it's a different kind of influence. The reports describe Russia's tactics as disruptive, aggressive, chaos-oriented. China, on the other hand, is playing a much longer game.
So it's less about chaos and more about
Influence through technology, investment in critical infrastructure, trying to shape political narratives over decades to be more favorable to Beijing's interests. But for that immediate day-to-day information trench warfare, the focus is squarely on the eastern border.
So you have these small countries. I mean, Estonia's population is less than 1.5 million. Iceland has fewer than 400,000 people. How do you possibly defend against a massive state propaganda machine? You can't just buy more ads.
You can't outshout them, no. And that's where we get into the core philosophy of it all. Which brings us to the first section of our deep dive. The whole concept of total defense and comprehensive security.
Total defense, that sounds intense. It sounds like something from a movie where every citizen gets issued a uniform.
It's less about uniforms and more about civic duty. In Sweden, the official doctrine is called totalförsvar, or total defense. In Finland, they call it comprehensive security.
But the core idea is the same.
The core idea is the same, and it's radical. It's the recognition that you cannot rely only on the military to keep the country safe. Modern threats target your economy, your infrastructure, your supply chains, and your psychology. So the defense has to involve everyone.
Okay, when you say everyone, how far does that go?
The doctrine says it involves civil defense, the private sector, nonprofits, and individual citizens. Finland is probably the best example of this. Their security framework explicitly views every single citizen as a security actor.
Wait, hold on. So if I'm a barista in Helsinki, I'm a security actor. How does that possibly work?
In a very real sense, yes. Think about it. Let's say there's a crisis, a massive power outage from a cyber attack, or a panic caused by a fake news story about a food shortage.
Okay.
Your personal resilience matters. Your ability to not panic, to maybe keep your coffee shop open on a generator, to see that fake story and not share it, that contributes to national security. If the population panics and society breaks down, the military can't function effectively.
It's like a national immune system. It's not just the specialized white blood cells. The whole body has to be healthy to fight an infection.
That is the perfect analogy. And Latvia has a similar model based on 3 pillars: the resilience of the individual, the resilience of the collective, so communities and businesses, and then the resilience of the state.
And Sweden has taken this a step further, right? With this specific agency for psychological defense.
They have. They explicitly divide their defense into a military component and a civil component. But in 2022, they reestablished a dedicated agency, the Psychological Defense Agency, or the MPF.
Okay, that name to an outsider, Psychological Defense Agency, sounds a little bit Orwellian.
It does, I get that. It sounds like something out of 1984.
Like the thought police, We're here from the government to defend your psychology.
It can sound that way to us because we're not used to thinking of our own minds as, terrain to be defended in a conflict. But their mission is actually very specific. It's not about brainwashing people to love the government.
So what is it about?
It's about protecting the population's will to defend, their försvarsvilja. It's about ensuring that citizens remain resistant to malign influence that tries to make them feel hopeless or turn on each other or just give up.
So it's not pro-government propaganda, it's counter-manipulation.
Exactly. It's building up the mental armor of the population. Finland identifies psychological resilience as one of the 7 vital functions of society. It's right up there with having electricity and a functioning food supply.
That's incredible. It reframes the whole idea of a battlefield.
It does. The logic is if an adversary can convince your citizens that their government is corrupt, their elections are rigged, and that resistance is futile, they've won without firing a single shot. You've defeated yourself.
Which means that trust in institutions, trust in your neighbors, becomes a strategic national resource.
Trust is the absolute currency of this entire model. Without high levels of social trust, none of this works. It is the foundation that everything else is built on.
Okay, so that's the big picture philosophy. We're all in this together. But let's get down to the front lines. Let's go back to those Lithuanian elves we started with. Because total defense is a great slogan, but what does it actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon when a troll farm starts pumping out lies?
It looks like a highly organized, civilian-led response. The Lithuanian elves are the perfect case study. We said there are up to 5,000 of them. But the most important detail from our sources is that they are not just a random, chaotic mob of keyboard warriors.
So they're not just getting into flame wars on Facebook.
No. They are integrated into the state's security architecture.
How does that work? I thought the whole point was their independence. If the government is paying them, doesn't that just make them government trolls?
But that's the thing. They aren't on the payroll. That is the critical distinction. They are volunteers. But they coordinate. Lithuania has a body called the Strategic Communications Coordination Working Group, which is led by the National Crisis Management Center.
And who is in that group?
It's the military, various government ministries, intelligence agencies, and representatives of the elves and other NGOs.
So the volunteers are literally at the same table as the spies.
They are, and they've developed this really clever tiered response model. They categorize information threats by severity.
Okay, so what are the tiers?
A level 1 or level 2 threat. That's the big stuff. A direct threat to national security, a major cyber attack on the power grid. That's handled by government ministers, by the state.
Makes sense.
But a level 3 threat. The source material says that is explicitly designated as an NGO and media-based response.
So the government deliberately steps back. Why? Why not just have the state squash every lie it finds?
Because of that core problem of censorship we talked about. If the government is the one running around debunking every single conspiracy theory, every manipulated photo...
It starts to look like Big Brother telling you what to think.
Exactly, and it's also exhausting for them. But more importantly, it undermines their credibility. You know the saying, the government has denied the rumors that...
Aliens have landed, which just makes everyone certain that aliens have landed.
Precisely. But if it's a group of volunteers, your neighbors, teachers, scientists with no official government badge, who point out, hey, this photo is clearly photoshopped, here's the original, and by the way, here's the metadata, it carries a completely different kind of weight.
It's peer-to-peer fact-checking.
It is. It allows the state to preserve its authority for the really big crises while empowering citizens to handle the day-to-day noise. It's incredibly smart.
Is this model unique to Lithuania, or are we seeing similar things elsewhere in the region?
We are definitely seeing similar things. The exact model varies, but the spirit is the same. In Estonia, they have something called the Communications Reserve.
That sounds like an army reserve, but for PR.
That's a great way to think about it. It's a group of about 100 specialists from the private sector, media, public relations, marketing. They have their regular day jobs, but in a national crisis, they can be mobilized to help the government communicate clearly and effectively.
That is brilliant. Because the last person you want writing your crisis communication for TikTok is a 60-year-old bureaucrat who's never used it. You want the pros.
You want the pros who know the platforms and the culture. And in Latvia, they take a similar approach by funding the Baltic Center of Media Excellence and providing significant support to NGOs.
And they do a lot of training, right?
A lot of very active training. The Lithuanian Riflemen's Union, which is a civilian defense organization, uses game-based learning, basically video games, to teach people how to spot hybrid threats. Latvia runs these complex tabletop exercises where officials have to respond in real time to a simulated information attack.
It's like they're treating information hygiene the same way you treat physical fitness. You have to constantly train and do the reps to stay strong.
They are. And speaking of hygiene and safety, just think about managing these networks. You have thousands of volunteers. You have their names, their contact information, maybe even data about what they're working on.
It's a massive database of people who are actively opposing a foreign state.
Which is a huge target. It's a compliance nightmare if it's not handled with extreme care.
Right. And that's where a resource like our sponsor, pi.compliancehub.wiki, is so crucial. If you're an NGO, or any business really, and you're handling personally identifiable information, especially in a high-stakes environment like this, you absolutely have to understand the regulations.
You don't want your list of elves getting leaked to the trolls.
Exactly, because in an information war, your personal data is ammunition for the other side. Doxing, maliciously publishing someone's private info to harass them is a standard tactic.
It is. Protecting that data is literally an act of self-defense.
So true. And for the individual volunteers, or just for you listening who wants to make sure you don't become a target, www.myprivacy.blog has practical tips you can use to lock down your own data. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about mental armor. We've discussed the philosophy, we've talked about the organized volunteers, but what about the average person, the student, the retiree, the person who's not part of an elf army? How do you armor plate an entire population's mind?
You do it through education. This, I would argue, is the real Nordic-Baltic superpower. Instead of just trying to block all the lies, they teach people how to spot them from a young age.
And Finland is the world champion at this, right?
Undisputed. They consistently top the media literacy index in Europe, and it's not by accident. They've been working on this for decades.
They start teaching this in kindergarten, I've heard?
They do. But the key here is that it's not a separate class called Fake News 101. It's woven into the fabric of the entire curriculum.
Okay, explain that. How do you teach media literacy in, say, math class?
In math, you might look at a chart or a graph from a news article and analyze how statistics can be used or manipulated to create a misleading impression.
Ah, I see.
In art class, you analyze propaganda posters or doctored photographs. You ask critical questions. Who created this image? Why did they create it? What emotional response are they trying to provoke in me?
I love that last question. What are they trying to make me feel? Because so much disinformation isn't aimed at your rational brain. It's aimed squarely at your emotions. It wants you to be angry or scared.
Precisely. If a piece of content gives you that immediate, hot, visceral, emotional reaction, that should be a warning sign. And they teach that to kids from a very young age.
And other countries are following this model.
Yes, Estonia is doing very similar work, integrating it into their school system and even into adult retraining programs. And then there's Sweden. Remember that total defense concept?
I do.
Well, a few years ago, the government sent a physical brochure to every single household in the country.
The In Case of Crisis or War booklet.
That's the one. It's a physical booklet that arrives in your mailbox right alongside the grocery store flyers.
And it has advice on things like storing water and finding a bomb shelter.
It does. But right there, next to the advice on first aid, is a whole section on how to recognize propaganda. It explicitly tells citizens, be on your guard against false information. Check your sources. Do not spread unconfirmed rumors.
That is so powerful. It puts critical thinking on the same level of importance as having a flashlight or a can opener in an emergency. It's basic survival gear.
It normalizes the idea that information can be a weapon.
Yeah.
There's also a specific tactic they use that goes beyond just critical thinking. It's called pre-bunking.
Pre-bunking. Okay, how is that different from debunking?
Debunking is reactive. A lie spreads across the internet and then a fact checker comes along and says, nope, that's false. The problem is, once millions of people have seen the lie, it's very hard to unring that bell.
The damage is already done.
The emotional residue of the lie sticks around even after it's corrected. Pre-bunking is proactive. It's about warning people ahead of time about the types of manipulation they are likely to see.
Give me an example of that.
Okay, so let's say a big election is coming up. Instead of waiting for fake videos of rigged voting machines to appear, a government agency or a media outlet might run a campaign that says, in the coming weeks, you might see claims that our voting machines can be easily hacked. This is a common disinformation tactic. Here's a short video explaining the 5 security features that make that impossible.
So you're inoculating the population against the lie before it even arrives.
You are. So when they later see that fake story on Facebook, their first thought isn't, oh my God, the election is stolen. It's, oh, right, this is that thing they warned me about. It triggers skepticism instead of panic.
It builds up cognitive antibodies.
That's a great way to put it. Iceland's media commission does this with educational campaigns for kids about social media risks. And then there's a much more controversial long-term strategy being implemented in Latvia.
You're talking about the language policy.
Yes, the transition to national language-only education. This is a very sensitive issue.
Extremely. So the policy is to phase out Russian as a language of instruction in schools.
Yeah. Correct. Now, there are ongoing debates about this from a minority rights perspective, which are valid. But if we look at it purely through the national security lens that our sources use, the strategic logic is very clear.
And what is that logic?
The logic is to reduce the vulnerability of the large Russian-speaking population to the Kremlin's information sphere. If a significant part of your population consumes news, entertainment, and education almost exclusively from media controlled by a hostile neighboring state...
They're living in a completely different information reality, an information bubble.
Exactly. The idea is that by shifting education to the national language, you better integrate that population into the national conversation and make them less susceptible to being isolated and manipulated by foreign propaganda. It's a long-term structural disruption strategy.
It really shows how deep this total defense concept goes. It's not just about reacting to tweets. It's about shaping education and culture over generations.
It is.
What about professional fact-checking? We've talked a lot about the volunteer elves, but is there an official professional layer to this?
Yes, and it's a vital part of the ecosystem. In Norway, for example, the government provides funding for an independent organization called Faktisk.
Faktisk, I like that name.
It means actually or factually, and they have an educational arm called Tenk, which means think.
Now, is there a risk if the government is funding the fact-checkers? How do you maintain independence?
That is the million-dollar question, and they've structured it very cleverly. The government provides the funding, but Faktisk is owned and operated by a consortium of Norway's largest and often fiercely competitive media companies.
Ah, so the government writes the check, but it doesn't hold the pen.
Exactly. The government's own departments will debunk misinformation on their own social media pages, of course. But for truly independent third-party verification, they and everyone else rely on Faktisk. That structural independence is the source of their credibility.
Without it, they'd just be another government spokesperson.
And nobody would trust them. It all comes back to trust.
Okay, let's look under the hood of the government itself. Section 4. The machine. How are these countries actually organized to fight this battle? We mentioned Sweden has its dedicated agency, but is everyone doing that? What does the org chart for this look like?
That's what's so interesting. There isn't one single model. It really varies depending on the country's administrative culture and history.
Yeah.
You have a spectrum.
Okay, so what's on one end of that spectrum?
On one end, you have the centralized model. Sweden is the prime example with its psychological defense agency. The MPF is the conductor of the orchestra. They have the central mandate. They lead the coordination. They support other agencies. Lithuania is also fairly centralized, with its National Crisis Management Center coordinating the efforts of 11 different institutions.
And on the other end, the opposite of centralized.
That would be the decentralized or network-based model. Finland and Norway lean more in this direction.
How does that work? Doesn't that risk becoming chaotic with everyone doing their own thing?
It could, but it's organized chaos. In Finland, for example, each government ministry is responsible for countering disinformation within its own sector. So if a fake story starts spreading that the country's grain reserves are contaminated...
And Ministry of Agriculture takes the lead.
Exactly, not some central propaganda agency. And if it's a rumor about school closures, the Ministry of Education handles it.
What's the advantage of that?
The advantage is expertise. The people in the Ministry of Agriculture know more about grain supplies than anyone else. They can spot the lie faster and debunk it with more authority and detail than a generalist ever could.
That makes a lot of sense. You put the experts on the case.
You do, and they have a central body, usually in the Prime Minister's office, that helps coordinate and ensure everyone is working together. But the real secret sauce in Finland is something they call the pool system.
The pool system? You mentioned this before. What is it?
It's a unique public-private partnership, a legacy of their Cold War preparedness that they wisely never dismantled. It's run by the National Emergency Supply Agency, or NESA.
And what does it do?
It brings all the key players from the private sector into pools for preparedness planning. You'll have a media pool with executives from newspapers and TV stations, a logistics pool with shipping companies, a telecom pool.
And they meet regularly during peacetime.
Yes, they meet, they plan for crises, they run exercises, they have coffee, they build relationships, and most importantly, they build trust.
So when a real crisis hits, they're not exchanging business cards for the first time in a bunker.
That is the golden rule of crisis management. You cannot build trust during a crisis. It has to be in the bank beforehand. Because of the pool system, when the power goes out, the government and the media already have established channels and a working relationship. It ensures reliable information can flow.
Trust again. It's the critical infrastructure underneath all the other infrastructure.
It is. And there's one more structural shift related to trust that's really radical. Intelligence transparency.
That sounds like a complete contradiction in terms.
It does, doesn't it? The whole point of intelligence is that it's secret.
Right. I have a secret. That's the job description of a spy.
Historically, yes. But intelligence agencies in Finland, Estonia, and Norway have made a strategic shift toward publishing public, unclassified reports detailing threats. They release annual assessments that say, very clearly, here is what Russia's doing, here are the tactics they're using, here's what China is up to.
Why on earth would you tell your adversary that you know what they're up to? Doesn't that give away your sources and methods?
It's a calculated risk, for sure. But they do it for two main reasons. First, deterrence. It sends a clear signal to the adversary. We see you. We know your playbook. You are not operating in the shadows.
Okay, that makes sense. A warning shot.
And the second reason is even more important. Public education. You cannot ask your citizens to be your first line of defense if you don't tell them what the threat actually looks like. By declassifying this information, you arm the population with knowledge. You turn them into millions of sensors.
It's a very bold move. It treats the public like adults. Here's the intelligence. It's scary. Now let's deal with it together.
And it seems to work. The Danish intelligence services do the same thing, releasing specific public assessments about threats to elections, for example, in Greenland. It demystifies the threat and makes it a shared public safety issue.
All right, so we've covered the soft power, the education, the volunteers, the organization. Now let's talk about the hard stuff. Section 5, hard power, disruption, law, and technology.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you just need to pull the plug.
This is definitely where the debate gets more contentious. And before we dive into the legal complexities, and they are very complex, it's probably a good time to mention our sponsors again.
Good call.
When governments start passing new laws about information, content, and digital platforms, compliance becomes absolutely critical for any business operating in that space.
Like a minefield.
It is. And that's why a resource like pi.compliancehub.wiki is so valuable. It helps you keep track of all these changing regulations, like the EU's Digital Services Act.
And for you, the listener, these laws can change how your personal data is collected and used. So it's always a good idea to stay informed. Check out www.myprivacy.blog to learn how to protect yourself.
Okay, so blocking and bans, let's start there. I'm guessing the Baltic states are leading the charge on this.
They are, without a doubt. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania take a much more aggressive legal posture, and it's born from their history and their geography. They don't see Russian state media outlets as journalism. They see them as weapons of war.
So they just shut them down.
In many cases, yes. Lithuania has laws, like Article 19 of their law on provision of information, that allow them to block domains and ban TV channels controlled by Russia or Belarus if they're deemed a threat to national security.
And Latvia.
Latvia has restricted over 400 websites on similar grounds.
400? That's a significant digital wall.
It is. And across the entire region, they use EU-level sanctions as the legal basis to suspend the broadcasting licenses of outlets like RT and Sputnik. So the legal argument isn't we don't like their opinion. This is state-controlled war propaganda, and it violates broadcasting laws.
That is the critical legal distinction they make. But it's not just about blocking websites. They're also passing new laws to criminalize foreign influence itself.
Okay, now that sounds like a very slippery slope.
It is, and they are trying to navigate it very carefully. In 2019, Denmark criminalized what it calls illegal influence.
What does that mean exactly? If I try to influence you to vote for my candidate, is that illegal?
No. The key element is the connection to a foreign intelligence service. The law defines it as cooperation with a foreign intelligence agency for the purpose of influencing public opinion. So if you're just a Danish citizen with a radical opinion, that's free speech. But if you're secretly coordinating with a foreign spy agency to spread that opinion, now that's a crime.
Ah, so it's not the content of the speech that's illegal. It's the hidden hand of the foreign agent.
That's the crucial point. It's about attribution.
Hmm?
Latvia has amended its criminal code in a similar way to penalize assisting a foreign state in activities directed against the nation. It's all about targeting the actor, not the idea.
What about the big tech companies, the platforms like Facebook, X, TikTok, where so much of this battle is fought? What's the approach there?
Well, for a long time it was a bit of a Wild West, but that's changing. Norway is taking a really interesting approach here. Their media authority is tasked with supervising how the big platforms comply with the EU's Digital Services Act, the DSA.
And what's their focus?
What's fascinating is their focus isn't on policing every individual piece of content. They're not trying to be the truth police for every single post. Instead, they're holding the platforms accountable for their systems.
What do you mean by their systems?
They're asking the platforms questions like, does your recommendation algorithm systematically amplify hate speech? Do you have robust, transparent processes for dealing with coordinated, inauthentic behavior? Have you conducted a thorough risk assessment of how your platform could be used to disrupt our next election?
So instead of playing whack-a-mole with millions of troll posts, they're telling the company to fix the machine that's producing the moles in the first place.
Exactly. It's a systemic architectural approach. It puts the burden on the multi-billion-dollar tech companies to design safer products, rather than putting the burden on a small country's government to clean up the mess.
It seems so much more sustainable.
It's the only way to scale a response, really.
Okay, let's make this all concrete. Let's talk about some real-world examples. Section 6, Case Studies in Information Warfare. You mentioned a particularly nasty case in Norway involving their child protection agency.
Yes, the agency is called Barnevernet, and this case is a textbook example of how information operations target our deepest emotions.
Child protection, that's already a high emotion area.
Extremely. So Norway became the target of a years-long, sustained disinformation campaign that claimed Barnevernet was engaged in, quote, child kidnappings and religious persecution.
My God, that's a horrific accusation. To claim the state is stealing children.
Yeah.
That taps into the most primal fear a parent can have.
And that was precisely the point. The narrative was designed to trigger that primal, protective, emotional response. The lies claimed the agency was targeting immigrant families or religious minorities, taking their children away to be Norwegianized or to be given to same-sex couples.
Is there any truth to it at all?
None. Of course, child protection cases are always complex and difficult, but the narrative of a systemic state-sponsored kidnapping ring was pure fiction. But the lie spread like wildfire, especially in Eastern European countries. It got so bad, it actually damaged Norway's diplomatic relations with several nations. There were large protests outside Norwegian embassies.
Wow. So a disinformation campaign literally caused an international incident.
That was the goal. To take Norway, a country that prides itself on human rights and liberal democracy, and paint it as a barbaric, family-destroying state. It's an attack on their soft power, their reputation on the world stage.
So how did they fight back against something so emotional? Facts and figures don't stand much of a chance against "they're stealing our kids."
It was incredibly difficult. It required a multi-pronged approach. Strategic communications to try and debunk the claims, a lot of diplomatic activity to explain their laws to foreign governments, and crucially, strengthening cooperation with child welfare professionals on the ground so they could counter the lies directly with the affected communities. It really shows how these attacks can target the most vulnerable parts of a society.
That's a heavy one. What about the election interference in Greenland? That sounds like something straight out of a spy novel.
It does, and this was a case identified by Danish intelligence. The target was the 2025 Greenlandic election, and the tactic was the sophisticated use of fake profiles.
Bots and trolls.
A mix. Some automated bots, but also very well-maintained fake personas that looked and acted like real Danish and Greenlandic politicians and activists. It's a tactic called astroturfing, making it look like there's a real grassroots movement when it's actually artificial.
And what were these fake profiles doing?
Spreading disinformation, amplifying divisive content, and posting controversial statements to stir up arguments.
And what was the ultimate goal? Was it to get a specific candidate elected?
Not necessarily. The goal is deeper and more insidious. The primary goal was to create societal fragmentation. to drive a wedge between Greenland and Denmark, which already have a complex post-colonial relationship.
I see.
And by inflaming those local tensions, the broader strategic goal was to weaken Greenlandic and Danish support for things like NATO, the EU, and aid for Ukraine.
So you use a local grievance as a lever to achieve a major foreign policy objective. Classic divide and conquer.
It's the playbook. If you can get people so angry about their local issues that they turn inward and stop caring about the wider world, you've won a major victory.
And finally, that case in Latvia. The Baltic anti-fascists.
Yes, this one is a masterclass in camouflage.
The name itself, Baltic anti-fascists, sounds... Well, it sounds like they'd be the good guys, right? Who isn't against fascism?
And that is the whole point of the camouflage. It was a pro-Kremlin group running a Telegram channel. They mimicked the language of grassroots left-wing activism. They claimed the Latvian government was fascist for removing old Soviet monuments or for supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression.
But what was the channel really used for?
It was used for intelligence gathering. They would ask their followers to send in photos of Latvian military convoys, to share personal information about government officials, to report on security measures at the border. They were crowdsourcing espionage under the banner of political activism.
So it was an intelligence operation disguised as a social justice movement?
That's exactly what it was. And in this case, the response wasn't just debunking. The Latvian State Security Service initiated a criminal investigation. Some of the key members ended up fleeing the country to Russia.
It's a clear example of where the soft power of the elves isn't enough, and you need the hard power of law enforcement.
Sometimes you do.
Incredible. So we've gone through the philosophy, the volunteers, the education, the government structures, the laws, and these real-world battles.
We've really unpacked what could be called the Nordic-Baltic model of societal defense.
If you had to boil that entire model down to a single sentence, what would it be?
I would say it is a dynamic balance between disruptive measures, so the laws, the bans, the police work, and societal resilience, the education, the community trust, the volunteers.
That's the sword and the shield.
It is. The region seems to have collectively understood a fundamental truth of the information age. You cannot block every lie. The internet is too vast. The trolls are too numerous. You have to inoculate your population against the lies instead.
You have to build a society that values the truth enough to actually fight for it.
And the whole of society approach means that no one is just a spectator. From the prime minister to the high school student scrolling TikTok, everyone is considered part of the national defense shield.
It turns what is often seen as a vulnerability of democracies, our openness, into a source of strength.
A distributed, resilient strength.
So what does all of this mean for you, our listener? You might not live in Finland or Estonia. You might live in a much larger, more diverse country, maybe a place where trust in government and institutions isn't quite so high.
But this isn't a regional problem anymore. We all live in an age of information warfare, no matter where we are. We can all learn a lesson from the Lithuanian elves and the Finnish school system.
Simple things, right? Verifying sources before you share something. Asking yourself that question. Why am I seeing this? What emotion is this trying to make me feel?
And just refusing to participate, refusing to share that unverified rage bait that's designed to make you angry. These are no longer just good habits. They are modern survival skills.
And maybe we can also learn to see our own communities as an asset. In a crisis, your neighbor isn't your competitor for the last can of beans. They're your partner in resilience.
Absolutely. But this all leads me to one final, maybe slightly provocative thought to leave you with.
Go for it.
The Nordic-Baltic states are, as we've said, relatively small. They are culturally quite homogenous. And they have historically very high levels of social trust. People generally trust their government, they trust the media, they trust each other. And that trust is the bedrock that allows this entire total defense model to work.
Right. If the government says this is Russian disinformation, a majority of people are inclined to believe them.
Exactly. So here's the question. Can this model scale?
Can it work in a huge politically polarized nation of 300 million people, where half the country is convinced the other half is evil?
Does our profound lack of trust make us fundamentally defenseless against this kind of threat? Or is it possible to rebuild that trust from the ground up, starting with media literacy in kindergarten and building from there?
That is the big question, isn't it? If trust is the armor and our armor is full of holes, are we walking into this new kind of battle, completely exposed?
It's something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you for walking us through all of this today. It's a complex and, frankly, unnerving topic, but a vital one.
My pleasure. It was a fascinating deep dive.
And a huge thank you to our sponsors for supporting this conversation. Please don't forget to visit www.myprivacy.blog for those personal data protection tips. Seriously, take 5 minutes after this and go lock down your accounts. And for any businesses or organizations out there, check out pi.compliancehub.wiki to get a handle on the incredibly complex world of information compliance.
Stay safe out there in the information environment.
And stay curious. We'll see you on the next deep dive.